one early morning in August 1914, just hours after World War I was declared, Great Britain did something that may have helped change the course of history. It sent out a ship that severed 5 German undersea cables that cut off Germany's communications outside Europe. Germany's last cable was later also controlled by Britain. The British ability to read those messages eventually made possible for the U.S. to join the fight against Germany, which some would argue determined the result of the war. Britain was able to cut the cable because it weaponized something seemingly minor that later proved critical. London at the time controlled over 3/4 of all telegraph cables installed and virtually had monopoly over laying and maintaining these cables. Back in the present, another country is now seeking to take over the world's telecom networks with help from a major corporation. That country is China, and the company is Huawei. In this special report, we look at how the Chinese company is helping the Communist Party achieve its global ambitions and how far they've gotten. This coverage mainly cites a report recently published by a French think tank linked to the French military. The 600-plus page report details the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to expand global influence, from buying up media outlets around the globe to control its own image, to trying to influence elections in other countries, to using trade as leverage to threaten and coerce others. We'll break down more of the report in later coverage, but for now, let's focus on Huawei. First, what type of company is Huawei? Well, the biggest chunk of Huawei's business centers on telecommunications equipment. If you don't know what that is, think about the towering structures hundreds of feet high made of iron girders. They are called telecom towers. And Huawei sells a lot of them, plus pretty much anything that helps you make phone calls and receive signal through your radio and TV. Huawei holds the world's largest market share of telecom equipment, taking up over 30% globally. And with that, many people using its products, Huawei gains a huge amount of user data as well as control over critical infrastructure in other nations, something that often proves a critical point of leverage in times of war. That's why it's so important for Western countries to figure out whether the company can or cannot be trusted. One of the most debated questions surrounding Huawei zeroes in on its relationship with the Chinese military. The company has repeatedly denied having any political ties and is adamant about being a private company. But not everyone buys it. Many say the sheer amount of effort the Chinese regime paid to rescue Huawei's CFO and daughter of its founder says a lot.
经中国政府不懈努力，当地时间9月24号。 孟晚舟女士已经乘坐中国政府包机离开加拿大，即将回到祖国，并与家人团聚。
In 2018, Beijing detained 2 Canadian citizens just 9 days after Canada arrested CFO Meng Wanzhou at Washington's request. But China allowed the 2 Canadians and 2 more young Americans also held hostage to fly home the minute the U.S. dropped its attempt to extradite Meng and allowed her to fly back to China. The regime did all of that despite harming its international image in the process, which Beijing has been trying to cultivate for decades. The situation ended with China being called out for its so-called hostage diplomacy and thuggery by mainstream media outlets in the West. Though Huawei claims to have no ties to the military, the company's founder is a former member of China's so-called People's Liberation Army, or PLA. He's also a card-carrying Communist Party loyalist. A Chinese biography of his life details how he, quote, studies deeply the military works of Communist leader Mao Zedong, absorbed their core ideas and incorporated them into building his company. One of those strategies that's still used by Huawei today is Mao's military method of starting in rural areas before gradually taking over cities. That's called surrounding the cities from the countryside. Mao used it to win the Chinese Civil War and took over mainland China from the former nationalist government. And that's exactly what Huawei did to take up global market shares. Using its low price advantage to start from less developed countries and rural areas of the US and Europe, it gradually gnawed away at bigger cities. While Huawei's closeness to the Communist Party extends beyond ideology. The company itself has a history of working with some of China's most notorious state-sponsored hackers. In 2013, India's intelligence agency reported that Huawei was part of a core tech plan organized by the Chinese military. The company was allegedly responsible for researching routers and switches. India was concerned about the potential for Huawei to put malware into their products and exploit it. Years later, in 2019, Bloomberg reported that Huawei had teamed up with the PLA on at least 10 projects, ranging from artificial intelligence to radio communications. While Forbes reported that Huawei worked with a company who was charged by the U.S. Justice Department. That's for launching cyber attacks against American companies. The worry that Huawei may conduct espionage on Beijing's behalf isn't just speculation. The company's overseas behaviors are raising serious red flags. For one, the Dutch Prime Minister's phone might have been tapped. A bombshell report earlier this year says Huawei was able to eavesdrop on all calls routed through one of the Netherlands' largest mobile networks, KPN, including those made by the country's then top leader. This is according to a secret internal report by KPN 10 years ago, but it was only recently made public. That's because at the time, the Dutch operator worried the report was too damning, and that if the public learned about it, the company wouldn't survive. In another case, Polish police arrested a Huawei employee together with a former Polish Secret Service agent in 2019. Police say the two may have spied for China and tried to bolster Huawei's ability to influence the Polish government. Both men deny any wrongdoing. In fact, Huawei doesn't have to be a military-linked company to serve the Communist Party's intelligence goals. Under the Chinese regime's 2017 intelligence law, everyone is responsible for state security and therefore must hand over information to the regime whenever officials ask for it. Huawei's equipment has a further reach than most may think. On top of cell towers in the sky, its gear also operates deep underwater. That's through its ambition for building submarine cables. The cables are made of long wires traveling through oceans. They make it possible for users to send messages and email to other countries and visit foreign websites. The total length of all undersea telecom cables would circle the Earth 30 times. They boast far greater data capacity than satellites and carry over 95% of the world's intercontinental voice and data traffic. That's why they're so important. Whoever controls them basically controls world communication and can get a hold of lots of data, sensitive or not. That means they can cut, disrupt, divert, or monitor digital traffic and spy on internet data. According to the French military report, China now controls over 10% of the world's undersea cables, mostly through Huawei Marine, now called HMN Technologies. But the figure is quickly approaching 24%, if including all the wires currently under construction. In Asia, China already holds a monopoly, taking up 30% of existing cables and 50% that are still being built. Its wide grip on the industry gives Beijing the ability to effectively shut down communications in the region. There are also concerns that China can use that leverage against Taiwan. Over the past few decades, Huawei has been busy making friends in Western political circles. The French report points out these politician friends later became de facto ambassadors for the Chinese Communist Party. They helped bolster Beijing's image through local media and protected the regime's interests behind the scenes. Huawei's European headquarters resides in Germany's Bavaria state. That's where Huawei is described as a generous sponsor of all mainstream parties, including the state's governing conservatives. And the company's money seems to have been well spent, as far as China is concerned. The current governor of Bavaria had previously defended Huawei's right to bid for Germany's 5G network contract. And in Ireland, the country's former cabinet minister, Dick Roche, earns $200,000 per year as a lobbyist for Huawei. He's been working for the company for over 5 years. Another notable Huawei lobbyist is top diplomat for the European Union, Sergei Abu. And in the nation of Estonia, Huawei hired a lobby firm with 3 former Estonian ministers on the payroll. Outside Europe, the Chinese regime gifted the African Union a brand new building in 2012 for use as its headquarters. 5 years later, African technicians allegedly discovered China actually bugged the building and had been spying on them for years. Technicians reportedly noticed a peak in data usage when the building was empty between midnight and 2 a.m. nightly. That's when secret data was being copied onto servers in China's Shanghai.